Hey, left, right, out. September 21st, another day in the life of American. So we'll go straight into it. Here's the thing at first. I check the market CNBC every day. Just to look at, the Dow and the S&P have been oscillating in positive territory up. Dow's been up a couple hundred points, been negative, S&P same. We look at the bond market, a little pop in the 10-year, but it's still, it's still there. Hang on, I'm gonna adjust this camera real quick. It's like off a little bit. Anyway, the bond market's not really signaling anything, to be too alarmed about at the moment. Gold's sitting in a good 1% gain today. Silver, which I thought yesterday it should have been, in tandem with gold. It wasn't, but it's, more than making up for that. Oil hovering around $70 a barrel. Nothing too crazy. Like I said, this Evergrande deal, I don't believe is the canary in the coal mine. It might be one little aspect of a failing Chinese housing market, which then in turn could turn into something. But right now it's not. They're going to do everything they can to stop that, I bet, unless it's just like an orchestrated event. But Evergrande is probably not what we're looking for. Like I said, you look at the bond markets, especially the 10-year, for any kind of panic, and of course the VIX and whatnot. But the debt markets usually signal what is going to happen. We get too tied into thinking that the stock market itself is some reflection of the economy, which is not. Used to be, a modest shadow of what the economy actually, reflective of what the economy was, and it's a forward pricing mechanism, but it's not anymore. It's more of a manipulated, maybe a granular effect of or granular reflection of the actual economy. It's really just a crapshoot, and I don't even know what to talk about it. But you look at it because there's a lot of money tied into it. But you can, if Americans haven't realized over the last 20 years the disparity between markets and reality, then I don't know what to tell you. But let's see, Chuck Schumer, he's calling for the $50,000 and under college student loan debt to be wiped out by this administration, which we'll see what happens. I mean, they give money to everybody else, right? And money seems to be no object to the government, so maybe it'll happen. Why hasn't it happened, to be totally honest, is beyond me, because that's something they promised was a student loan forgiveness, and they forget. Essentially, if you look at how they prop up certain industries and how through their cohort in the Fed, how they allow certain entities to borrow at 0% and buy up real assets. I mean, essentially, why can't the little guy get a little something, I guess? But I mean, I don't agree with it in a sense, but everybody on the top end of this whole giant pyramid scheme of the American economy is playing that game. But, whatever. And most of these kids that are going into college, they're pretty much told that you have to do this. And in a sense, they're living in this false reality, and it's pushing them into the colleges. And now everybody can go to college. And now a bachelor's degree doesn't really mean anything. It's basically a glorified high school diploma at this point. Call it a college diploma. But instead of going into trades or going into a degree program that ties you directly into a job, like some kind of medical field engineering, definitely not business or liberal arts or underwater basket weaving type degrees. Those are devastating people in the long run. It's funny, I have my daughter who watches this show, and they're doing a Halloween special, and granted the kids in the family in this TV family, one of them, she's a fairly intelligent, like 11, 12-year-old, and her friend comes to a Halloween party, and they're like, well, what are you? And she's in a Starbucks barista thing, and she's like, I'm a 28-year-old master's degree holding barista. Scary. It's like, yeah, something that's essentially that's some underlying humor there that was pretty funny. Okay, I want to address one thing because I keep seeing it, and I didn't, to be totally honest, I wasn't on top of this. I just happened to hear it last night about the Border Patrol agents supposedly whipping Haitian migrants that are crossing the border, which that's a whole nother issue when you get into why there's Haitian migrants coming across, or immigrants coming across the border right now. We can go back, you can go far back, like what has happened to Haiti. That's a whole nother deal. And you can go into the weeds on that. But I watched the video finally, so I was like, well, somebody said it was lasso, but I actually went ahead and I pulled the video up, and this guy's not whipping him, all right? There's a couple of aspects if you're not tied into any kind of, if you're not used to being around horses or just livestock in general. So those are reins that he's using, and he's not whipping the guy like in compliance. So he's on a horse, and one of the things about horses can be spooky. You don't want to allow somebody that you don't want around around the head, where they can manipulate the horse. It could make things precarious for you and that individual, especially, in that instance. So one, you use the reins to, manipulate the horse back and forth, or to get him to go here and there. And in this instance, to keep people away from parts of the horse that you don't want them to. So you don't want somebody to come up behind the horse because you don't want them to get kicked, and you don't want the horse to get spooked. You don't want somebody to get near the head of the horse because, one, they can grab the bridle and manipulate the horse itself and also spook it. It's a precarious situation for both people. Both those people can be injured. So he was literally spinning the rein, and that one, use that for the horses. But in this instance, he was essentially maneuvering the horse, but then also keeping that guy away from vulnerable spots around that horse. So I didn't see anything wrong with that, and I'd be very critical if there was something wrong. Now I didn't see, somebody said something about a lasso, and they were conflating that with a whip, and I didn't see any ropes or anything being used, and maybe there was. I'm like reading this one. The agent swung a whip maliciously, charging the horse toward the men. And I don't see, I'm looking at the picture right now. I'm trying to see what he has actually in his hand. All I see these guys is with reins, and maybe a couple guys have some riatas on them or whatnot. But I don't see anything real telling of abuse. But it doesn't stop the media from conflating this and pushing some sort of agenda, which the people that they defend are directly, tied into why these people are even there. It's crazy. But I wanted to dispel that it's not a black and white malicious issue on the Border Patrol's end. I was like, well, what else is going on? Well, there's some COVID stuff. I don't like to talk about it on here as much, but you have some things in the military, people that are trying to get religious exemptions, and it could be something where it puts our military in a predicament where there's different military readiness issues, we'll just put it that way. And one article just came out was about the Navy SEALs, and roughly I think a quarter of them have tried to get a religious exemption. And you think about that, well, there's roughly, there's spec ops, but they're 2,500 roughly the active duty SEALs, and you take a quarter of them out that are undeployable essentially, or according to this policy that's being implemented. And you think that what that does to military readiness. Now, if you extrapolate that across the services, if there's a number, because I remember, here's one. So I remember being on the ship going overseas, and they were trying to give us the anthrax vaccine. So we got smallpox. I remember that, because it gave you like a little bump, and you had to put even though we're working and doing all kinds of stuff, you had to put this Band-Aid over there so you didn't get infected. Because there was a couple guys that had some adverse reactions to that, and it was mainly because there was like festering, and it's not necessarily smallpox, because I think it's cowpox. I could be wrong on that one, but I believe it's a mild form of cowpox. But anyway, so there was kind of almost a mass revolt on the ship about the anthrax. And anthrax, there has been people that have had some issues with it in the military. It's not just one shot, it's a series of shots. So people on the ship didn't want to deal with that. And eventually that captain kind of gave in, and we didn't get our anthrax rounds, but other people had to on other deployed units. They end up getting their a series of anthrax shots, and some people back in CONUS did that. And like I said, there was a few interesting cases of people that not interesting cases, but people that had adverse reactions to those series of shots. So this isn't like something new in the military. Granted, we get a lot of shots. Like when I was active, I don't even remember all the shots. There's a whole, I guess you can pull your medical record and see them all, but I remember standing in lines and getting like, I don't know how many shots, and I don't even know if that's medically ethical that you take a series of shots all together, or those shots. I don't know how much of them actually look into, because it's mainly docs. And what I mean by docs is like Navy corpsmen that are doing this. So you're just like in a assembly line essentially, and they're just sticking you in this, mainly boot camp. And then when you get out in the fleet force, you have to keep your shots up too. So sometimes you go in there and you'll get like 3 rounds or whatever it is. And who knows? You get, if you were in the military, essentially, I know, speaking from experience, that you've probably been poked more than the next 5 people combined around you. I mean, you get a lot of vaccinations. So it's interesting to look at the military, how they're regarding this whole thing, like essentially a mandatory vaccine. Here's another thing, and I'm not going to bring it up, but there's a whistleblower on Project Veritas, and it has to do with some reporting issues with the VER system, and this was an Indian Health Service deal, or HSS, but it was in an Indian Native American hospital, and I believe it was in Arizona. But interesting to look up. I'm not going to go into it, but check it out. Project Veritas website. You can look it up, and you go through a lot of that stuff. It's pretty interesting. But and you get to see somehow the other side kind of views you. I mean, they're not the real string pullers, but they're people in influential places in the media or in business, and they tend to look down on you. I'll just put it that way. I listened to President Trump this morning on Glenn Beck. Very interesting thing he said about Milley. So apparently, which I don't know what in the world, I don't know why we leave equipment there, because there's different operational security issues when it comes to leaving military equipment in countries that it could fall in the wrong hands. But anyway, I guess, and I've heard this argument too from the Army in particular, that it's cheaper to leave the equipment there than ship it back. It never really made too much sense to me. It's like, well, it's also cheaper to leave it in the States than ship it over there, to be honest. But the operational security issues of leaving that type of equipment over there, essentially arming who God knows who with the possibility of having to go back and face your own equipment. It's in an adversarial fashion. But Trump was, I guess, this is what Trump said, and I'll paraphrase it, and it was pretty. I enjoyed it thoroughly listening to him. But anyway, he said something that Milley was there, and Milley was telling him that it's cheaper to leave that stuff there when they were figuring out this Afghanistan withdrawal under his administration. And he's like, well, what do you mean it's cheaper? He's like, he's like, that's insane. He referenced his experience in construction. He's like, that's insanity. Just give me a tank of gas and a pilot, and we'll figure something out. And I agree with him. It's like, hey, let's get it done. It's cheaper to leave it there. Well, it may be so, but you're also leaving gear. It's gear drift. It's gear for other people to utilize for or against you. We have to assume that it could be used against you or by your enemies. So that security of that gear is paramount, and to me that should be a baked-in cost when you deploy into these areas. A cost that's taken account of is like, hey, we're bringing our equipment over here to whatever conducts this such and such mission or operation or whatever the case may be, and then we also have to take account of extracting that stuff, and that cost should be taken into account before you even go in. So the excuses that some of these generals are putting forth, and apparently this, General Trump is just astounding, especially when, in fact, like I said, I've brought this up before, is the accountability issue. When you hold the people that are under your command accountable for the most minute pieces of equipment, financially liable, but then it's cool that you, who are responsible for vast sums of money, gear, equipment, people, that when you leave things behind, that you're not held accountable for that. And it's just like we're actually saving money or whatever. They justify it in various means. It seems like a double standard to me. And even when I was in, it felt like a double standard, because in the Marine Corps, I haven't experienced that where we just leave a bunch of crap. In fact, if you're going to leave something, you destroy it, or if you have to leave it. And I don't know if that's the same way in the Marine Corps today, but when I was in and the Army was talking about it, because the Army did it, they left stuff in various AOs, and they were talking about leaving things in Iraq. This sort of particularly I remember is some Army captain talking about it, and it's like, yeah, it's just cheaper just to leave it there. And I was thinking about all the equipment, especially the Marine Corps, that repurposes, sometimes Army equipment and other, lessers. We do more with less, is what we always said. We get the crap that's passed down to us. But I was thinking about all that good equipment, MRAPs, brand new Humvees that are left over there. And in this case, Blackhawks. I was like, man, from what the stuff that I seen was in the Marine Corps, you'd think that maybe the Marine Corps could jump on some of the Army stuff if they just want to leave it, and we'll take it. But I don't know. There's obviously some other political agendas that are going on upstairs, and but those are some thoughts that I had about it. But it's interesting to hear Trump talk about Milley. And in that interview, I'll say this: he wasn't. He's a lot more calm and collected than what the perception is under his first, when he was president. It was nice to hear. I'd like to hear more of what he has to say. And if he'd undo some of the veils of what he's seen while he was there, and be very enlightening for the American people. I was just trying to look at some other things. So we'll go back to the financial markets. Like I said, look at the 10-year. Some other things you can do, like if you're hedged, like you can sell options in this market. And if you get called out, you make some money. Just make it. That's another thing. Is why can't you give financial advice where we have to pander to people's incompetence? It's as long as you're not being malicious. It should be on the person, like make their own decisions. And that goes for various things. But that's one of the things you can't talk about. You can't give people financial advice whatsoever. But I'll tell you what I would do is, like, I would be selling some options. They would within my cost perspective, selling some options out where if I get called out, I actually make money doing that, but I also am getting cash flow from the options that I'm selling. Or you can sell puts if you see stuff that you want to buy, or you're willing to buy at a certain price. Hey, you can sell some puts, get some cash flow in. But those are things that you can do in this market right now. Hedge, you can hedge things with volatility or with options as well. But like I said, I like to play the options because you can actually, excuse me, create cash flow on positions you have. So if you have stuff that has a lot of options traded, if you have, the big whatever names, like right now, ConocoPhillips apparently going to have a deal with Shell, which that's another thing in the that was talked about yesterday. But it's the minor correction that we've seen, or the sell-off, kind of put that under the radar. But Shell's apparently selling ConocoPhillips a lot of its Permian Basin assets there for multiple billions of dollars. Interesting for ConocoPhillips. ConocoPhillips, I worked indirectly for them as a drilling fluids engineer. But they, when I was there, they were pushing from North Dakota. They were looking for other things. I remember them talking about Alaska, and then it's funny that they pivot to the Permian. I know there was a little bit there going on when I was there, but they didn't really talk. The guys that I were privy to, or the conversations, they didn't really talk too much about it. So it's an interesting 180 that from what I've seen from them. But we'll see what happens, and maybe it's you'd hope that we could actually start drilling again and producing oil like we were under the Trump administration. Because even though crazy monetary policy, the only way to, if you can't get the Fed to actually have a sane monetary system, the only way to combat the higher prices is with producing more. And that's what I've said in the past, we can produce as much as we possibly can to hopefully offset the insanity that's going up top. But eventually we won't believe and do that because we keep justifying their policies. They're just going to keep doing it until there's no turning back. But what was I saying? Oh, go get back to, like, so if you take like a ConocoPhillips, you had like 100 shares of ConocoPhillips, you go to the options market, and you could actually go and sell some calls against it. That's just an example. I don't actually have ConocoPhillips stock or anything, but if you had a position like that, or if you had like a position in Ford or whatever, or whatnot, you can go look at the option market and see what kind of depth it has. And if if you're selling options, well, I'll say this, and you can go into depth, is you want short term options. You don't want to sell too far out, and the reason being is because, well, one, you need to, there's give and take, so it depends on what you are looking for. But I would sell in short term, because if you're selling options, you want the time decay to work in your favor. If you're buying options, you want to buy out, and that's so you minimize the decay of time on that option. It gives you the greater propensity to be in the money, to make money off that if you get some movement. But those are my 2 cents on how to make a little money in this market. Because we look at the crypto space, it's under a lot of pressure. Bitcoin right now is down another 4%. We're pushing that. We're around 42,000. But another way to create cash flow, if you have Bitcoin or some of these other things, you could stake it in, like here, even if you have a stable coin, which is interesting because I've done this. I just threw a few $100 into a stable coin just for kicks, because I was like, well, this money's like sitting in a bank account, literally losing money, right? So I put like a couple $100 into a stable coin and staked it at 10% interest, or essentially with the 10% 3-month return. It's not compounded like monthly or anything. It's like annual basis, but it's still way better than 0.0001% you get in a bank account or whatever that is, even a high yielding bank account. And in reality, that's about as good a return as you can get on your dollars if you're wanting a safe investment, because stablecoin theoretically is backed by a dollar. They're that coin is essentially worth $1.99 of a dollar. You can watch it kind of reverberate on the price. So I mean, even then at 10%, you might not, you're just barely at, maybe slightly beating real inflation, or I'm going to call it real rising prices, because like I said, inflation is a monetary phenomena. I even heard Glenn Beck this morning mess that one up. He got it right in principle, like, okay, finite amount of resources, expanding money supply, chasing those finite resources. In a sense, that's how you drive prices up. Now, the expanding money supply there, that is the inflation. The effect of that is when you have a finite goods, or one of the effects, just like symptoms of the flu. The flu does one thing. How the flu manifests is in various symptoms that you experience in the body. Same thing with monetary fund. It's the disease, and how it manifests in the symptoms can be prices rising, but it also can be prices fluctuating. So you can see in an inflationary environment, expanding money supply, you can see markets crash in one area and markets go up, because it's like waves. So you'll see highly speculative moves. You can see like the housing market go up, and then it might crash, and then that money goes somewhere else. But then at the same time, when you have a housing market crash, since it's so elated with debt, it's not necessary. You actually have a contraction in the money supply because of fractional reserve banking. But then that overall expansion is still there, typically. But it's vastly more complicated than what is put out there. But it's also more simplistic than what they're saying. But it's good to get the terminologies right so you can understand what is actually going on. But if you look at inflation, and I'll probably get into this a lot more, usually it's, because I hate that all prices rising, and you probably are taught that now in your college courses. That's not the case. Inflation, like I said, is a monetary phenomenon. Overall, prices generally rise over time because of that. But when you see it, the ramifications, usually you see that inflation, that money, that newly printed money that's usually being utilized by I call it the first adopters, but the people that first get it, banks, institutions, people of assets and whatnot, they put it into assets, capital goods and whatnot. So you're going to see that and for the average person, what they perceive as an asset is a house. So you see it in like a housing market, you see it in vehicle, you see it, but first you see it in capital equipment. You'll see it in all these other areas more predominantly. And there's some good good books about this, how you see the manifestation of expansion of money. But we won't go into that. I want to keep this kind of quick, and I'm already way past what I was at. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there, in fact, because we can go into a lot of other things. I could talk for a long time about different, and I gotta just pick a story a day and just go into it instead of going all over the place. But if you don't have time to go into news, like I was listening, like I said, the FDA panel thing's 8 hours long. Like, who has the time to literally go through and listen to all the presenters off, the voting for the FDA meeting for the boosters? That's one example. Now they have a lot of those, and you can find it on YouTube. But who the hell has the time to do that? Well, maybe I, should start narrowing my view a little bit on that, and so that you can understand it. But anyway, I try to comprise a few stories that I believe are pertinent that aren't well reported on, so that gives you a better view of what actually is going on. So you're not constrained into a box of thinking that the media itself is trying to put you into, or now even YouTube and all these other trying to keep you on in a proverbial box of thought. And YouTube used to be super awesome. You could find all kinds of weird stuff. I've noticed that a lot of guys I used to listen to, they weren't even that outlandish. They're just like bring up certain topics in life or news things, or some of them were Christians, that they're gone. They're like not even on YouTube anymore. One of the best investigative journalists I've ever seen, he's gone. I'm not going to mention his name on here, but like his channel got taken down, and then he came up as like iteration 3 by the time they finally just axed him completely. But yeah, he ruffled some feathers, but it wasn't in a malicious manner. It wasn't contriving things. He'd have people on, and he would get into stories, and awesome investigative journalist, what's left of them out there. He's one of the a few that are left, and of course YouTube axed him. So anyway, peace. Talk to you later.